Hello everybody, welcome to the Joy of Dwarven Painting. I'm Hamster. Today we're painting dungeons, including the classic scheme, vaulted, and sinister dungeons. So let's get started. So let's start with classic dungeons. I'm painting a straight wall here, but this is going to get you through most of the classic dungeon pieces. For step one, we're going to start picking out some accent stones to add a little variety to the piece. We're going to use Picorni Earth Stone to do it. You don't have to worry about being neat with this step because there's going to be a dry brush at the end that will cover up any wonky areas. In fact, sometimes I even like to get it in the cracks a little bit just so there will be patches of this accent color in the end result. If you're batch painting, of course, you can do each one differently, pick out different stones, fewer or a few more, whatever you'd like. I'm just going for a nice opaque base coat on these. If you get some that are not fully opaque, that's okay. That'll just add a little more variance to your piece. This step we're just trying to get through because it will all get saved by the final dry brush. Here, I'll even hit a small section of floor for this one. Now I'm going to speed up the drying with the hair dryer. If you're doing a large batch, you probably don't have to do this because your first pieces in the assembly line should be ready to go for the next step by the time you reach the end of the batch. But if you do use the hair dryer, be careful because it can get hot on your fingers. For step two of classic dungeons, we're going to do a dry brush over the entire piece, including the accent stones here, using a mix of Cavern's dry brush and school bus. It's going to be about 3-to-1, 3 parts Cavern, 1 part school bus. If you already have Cavern's dry brush and you don't have school bus, Cavern's dry brush will do a good job of highlighting the piece, and it will be pretty close to the factory scheme. But to get as close as possible, you'll want 3 parts Cavern's dry brush to 1 part school bus. And I have a mix ready made here. You get a bunch of these little bottles for pretty cheap online. And this is going to help out your batch painting too, is to just have a big batch of your paint mix. When we're doing an all-over dry brush, I like to use a pretty big brush. This is about 1 inch. You can probably get away with just a 1/2 inch too. This might be a little overkill, but this will speed up your process. Now, if you've never dry brushed before, we're gonna load the brush just like you normally would, except before we paint the piece, we're gonna rub most of it off. And you can even squeeze some of it out, especially on these big brushes. You want very little paint on the piece. When you start scratching the paper towel like this, that's a good sign. I'm going to load up a little more just so there's a little bit more on the brush. And then you kind of want to start with sort of a feather dust motion. You see it's streaking a little bit here, so I'm going to rub even more off on the brush. And this is going to help just grab the texture. If it streaks a little bit, you can just sort of continue and change directions, and it will give a nice varied sort of textured look. But you want very light brush pressure. You don't want to be pressing down very much because you just want the topmost parts of the piece to catch, and you want some of the areas of texture to remain dark in the recesses. So once you get the hang of it, you can go pretty fast. You just want your pressure to be light. And that's all there is to it for classic dungeons, a quick 2-step process. Now let's move on to your vaulted pieces. Step 1 of the vaulted dungeons is the same as classic dungeons, so I've already painted my accent stones in earth stone. So now we're going to move on to the pillars and the arches on the wall. So I'll start by painting the top and bottom of the pillars as well as that wall arch black. Don't forget about the top part of the arch here. You can always use your finger to wipe off an overlap. I forget this spot all the time, so I'm just pointing it out. For this larger arch area, I just flatten out that brush. Use a perpendicular angle to cover that nice and quick. Moving on to step 3, we're still working on the pillars. We're going to use deep lava to give this an awesome red color to really make your vaulted dungeons pop. These pillars have some nice flat planes, so you can use that perpendicular angle again to guide you and get some nice fast coverage. If there's a couple spots that get a little messy, don't worry too much about it, because just like on the classic, there's going to be a dry brush step at the end that can usually hide any mistakes. Sometimes these pillar sections will take an additional coat of paint here. All right, hair dryer time. The last step is that same overall dry brush of Caverns Dry Brush and School Bus, and we're even going to do it on these pillars that we just painted because it will give it an all-over cohesive, ancient, dusty look, but still leave behind that separation and variance between the parts. I might give it a little bit of a lighter touch on the pillars so we don't cover it up entirely, but I'm just kind of going with the flow all over the piece. That's it for Vaulted Dungeons. Let's move on to Sinister. The first Sinister step is similarly an accent, but instead of picking out different stones, we're going to leave some mossy gunk in some of the cracks with moss green from Picorni. So we're just going to pick out some varied and random recesses to put this in. And again, you don't have to be very neat because all the additional steps will cover up any parts that may be left behind on the raised sections. So you just want to get this done with quickly. Anytime there's a stone that has an interesting crack that's not on the rest of the piece, I like to hit that with this. Now you really want to make sure this step takes a good long while to dry because it takes a little bit longer when it's collected in the recesses, and we're gonna do a broad strokes dry brush like step after this, and you don't want it to get pulled out of the recesses. So leave it sit, maybe use the hairdryer even if you're batch painting before you move on. The next step is an all-over base coat of a new mix. It's basically blue and black. You can use your Basil blue or really any blue and black just to really darken down this piece to give it a nice shadow. If you have it, I even like to use a glossier black because it looks a little bit darker. And we're not going to be dry brushing, but we're going to use our perpendicular angle to make sure it doesn't get into the cracks that we've put the moss effect in. So I'm not rubbing any paint off. I might get rid of a little excess, but you want a lot of coverage from this. So you see here, as long as you're utilizing the angle of the piece, you can still leave behind this moss. And even if you do cover some of it up, you can always pull it out with a clean brush. And there it's revealed. And it's okay if this step does cover up some of that moss green. That's why you don't have to be afraid to go overboard on that first step. You want enough that some of it's left behind. You don't have to worry about hitting the pillars because we're going to cover those up with paint after this. All right. Next, we're moving on to the pillars once again. The tops and bottoms will be black, just like the vaulted pillars, but the pillar itself will be a purple mix. It's any purple you'd like, mixed with a little black and a little white to desaturate it as well. You kind of want it to be almost a purple gray. I did not paint the arches on the walls, but you are welcome to pick those out if you'd like. As you can see, you can always rotate the piece, flip it around to give yourself an easier angle of access. You rarely have to have pencil-like precision. You can usually find some angle of either brush or piece to help you with an easier application. Alright, so far what we have is a really dark piece with a little bit of moss. So this last step is my favorite. To me, it's what makes it sinister and makes it magical. It's going to be a dry brush again at the end, but a little bit more selective, and it's going to be a mix of a blue-green with a little bit of yellow and white to give it this ambient light effect or glowing moss type of effect. And what I would do is just start with any blue-green that you have and add yellow to it. If you start with a forest type green, it's going to look like earthy and grassy. We want it to kind of have that deadly magic feel. So start with a bluish green and add your yellow and white to that. So I used Picorni Deep Water Green, mixed in some Lava Yellow and white. And if you have it, you can even maybe throw in some Arcane Acid to give it that real glowy pop. So usually when I start the dry brush, I focus on the edges and just sort of frame it. And it's okay if it goes sort of outside the lines a little bit, because I'm going to sort of sunburst certain areas anyway. So it can streak, it can scratch, doesn't have to be perfect. And once I get most of these edges, I'll sort of start to do a gradient from the top down. So on the back sides here especially, I make it go all the way across the top and sort of make a V shape as I go down. Still with just a simple fast dry brushing technique. Just being a little bit more selective on the area. Similar thing on the inside faces here, just let it be heavier on the top and let it fade down. Wherever there's tiling, I like to hit a little bloom on the edges of those tiles, just like that. And make sure you really rub off the paint when you dry brush the pillars, so it's just a subtle effect on those, but we don't lose the painting we have done on the piece. Kind of hit the corners, let it bloom out a little bit. And there you have it. Thank you for joining me, and please also join me on Hamster's Hobby Hang on our Twitch channel Thursdays at 6 p.m. Eastern at Dwarvenforgelive, and hop into our Discord. We have a bunch of great fans that can help you with your painting journey as well. See you later.